The laughter started before the hearing did. Quincy Bryant, a 42-year-old courthouse maintenance supervisor from Houston, sat alone at the respondent's table while his wife smiled at a room full of spectators. Most people believed Vanessa Bryant had spent years supporting a husband who never became anything. They saw an old Ford truck, worn work boots, and a man who rarely spoke above a murmur. What they didn't know was that Quincy had spent 8 months collecting something far more valuable than arguments. When Vanessa pointed at him and said, "This man has nothing," Quincy slid a black flash drive across the table. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, tell me your country and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious to see where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow burn stories where the truth takes its time, but always arrives, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next part. 7 years before the divorce hearing, nobody would have predicted that Quincy Bryant and Vanessa Bryant would end up sitting on opposite sides of a courtroom. Back then, they looked like a solid Houston couple. Not flashy, not wealthy, just stable. They bought a 3-bedroom brick house in Pearland in 2017, 20 miles south of downtown Houston. The backyard was small. The fence leaned slightly near the corner lot. The kitchen still had the original cabinets from the previous owner. Vanessa hated those cabinets. Quincy always said he would replace them eventually. He never did. Not because he couldn't. Because something else became more important. When they first married, Quincy worked as a security systems engineer for Sentinel Integrated Solutions, a private company that designed surveillance and access control systems for hospitals, office towers, and government facilities across Texas. The pay was good. The benefits were excellent. His future looked promising. Vanessa loved telling people about his job. Whenever someone asked what her husband did, her answer came quickly. "He's an engineer." People nodded with approval. Those words carried weight. At least they did to Vanessa. But life changed during their 4th year of marriage. One phone call changed everything. Quincy's father, Harold Bryant, was diagnosed with aggressive Parkinson's disease. The decline happened faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, simple tasks became difficult. Within a year, he needed daily assistance. Quincy had a choice: continue chasing promotions, or help care for the man who had raised him alone after his mother's death. The decision wasn't complicated for him. He resigned from Sentinel. Most people thought he was crazy. Even some friends told him so. "You're throwing away your career. You'll never get that momentum back. Your dad wouldn't want that." Quincy listened. Then he did what he believed was right. He accepted a facilities maintenance position with Harris County. The pay dropped significantly. The hours became predictable. The job allowed him to stay close to home. Every morning before work, he checked on his father. Every evening after work, he drove across town again. Doctor appointments, physical therapy sessions, medication schedules, insurance paperwork. He handled everything quietly. He never posted about it online, never complained, never asked for sympathy. At first, Vanessa seemed supportive. She attended appointments, helped organize medications, told coworkers how proud she was of her husband. But support slowly turned into frustration. Frustration became resentment. Resentment became something colder. The first signs were small. So small, Quincy almost ignored them. One evening, they attended a barbecue hosted by neighbors. Someone asked what Quincy was doing these days. Before he could answer, Vanessa laughed. "He basically fixes things for the county now." The group chuckled politely. Nobody thought much about it. Neither did Quincy. But he remembered it. Months later, the comments became more frequent. Whenever bills were discussed, whenever careers came up, whenever one of Vanessa's friends received a promotion, she never screamed, never exploded. The criticism came disguised as casual conversation. "I just thought we'd be further along by now. You used to be so driven. Most men your age are building something." Each sentence landed softly. That was what made them effective. A hammer leaves bruises. Needles leave punctures. Over time, the punctures hurt more. Meanwhile, Vanessa's career accelerated. She joined Sterling Horizon Realty. Within 3 years, she climbed from sales manager to regional director. The promotions came fast. The bonuses came faster. New wardrobe, luxury conferences, executive retreats, business class flights, professional photo shoots. The more successful she became, the more she seemed embarrassed by the life Quincy represented. He still drove his old Ford F-150. The truck had nearly 180,000 miles on it. The paint was faded. The driver's seat had a tear near the headrest. He never cared. The truck worked. That was enough. Vanessa cared. Very much. One Saturday afternoon, she stared at the truck parked in the driveway. Then she looked at a neighbor's new Mercedes SUV. The comparison lingered longer than Quincy liked. "You know," she said casually, "people notice things." Quincy tightened a loose hinge on the backyard gate. "Like what?" "Like success." He glanced at her. She looked away first. The conversation ended there, but neither forgot it. As the years passed, Quincy noticed a pattern. Vanessa increasingly measured people by appearances, job titles, cars, neighborhoods, vacation destinations, social status. People who once seemed ordinary suddenly became important if they gained influence. Others became invisible when they lost it. The shift bothered him, not because it hurt his pride, because it changed who she was, or perhaps revealed who she had always been. By 2023, Harold Bryant's health had deteriorated dramatically. The final months were difficult. Some nights, Quincy slept in a chair beside his father's hospital bed. Other nights, he drove home just before sunrise and went straight to work. The exhaustion showed. Gray appeared around his temples. Dark circles formed under his eyes, Vanessa noticed. But her response wasn't concern. It was criticism. "You always look tired." Quincy simply nodded, because explaining would accomplish nothing. When Harold passed away, Quincy handled the funeral arrangements himself. The service took place at a small church in southwest Houston. Rain fell steadily that morning. Only 32 people attended. Quincy stood beside the casket for nearly an hour after everyone left. Vanessa waited in the car, scrolling through her phone. The image stayed with him. Not because she had done anything dramatic, because she hadn't. The absence of emotion said enough. After the funeral, something inside Quincy changed. Not anger, not bitterness, clarity. He stopped trying to convince Vanessa to respect him, stopped defending his choices, stopped explaining himself. He focused on work, on maintaining the house, on paying bills, on living quietly. Ironically, that seemed to irritate her even more. She wanted reactions, arguments, defensiveness. Instead, she got silence. The silence made her speak louder. One Tuesday evening in October, Quincy returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Vanessa wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't in the living room. He heard her voice upstairs. The office door was closed. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but as he passed the hallway, he heard one sentence clearly. "Yes, transfer it into the new account." He paused, just briefly, then kept walking. 20 minutes later, Vanessa came downstairs. She appeared surprised to see him home. "You're early." "Meeting got canceled." She smiled. Too quickly, too carefully. That caught his attention. Later that night, after Vanessa fell asleep, Quincy sat alone in the kitchen. The digital clock above the microwave read 11:42 p.m. Rain tapped softly against the windows. He opened the household banking app on his phone. Nothing obvious appeared. Everything looked normal. But years working with security systems had taught him something valuable. People often reveal themselves through patterns. Not mistakes, patterns. Over the next few weeks, Quincy paid attention. Small withdrawals, unusual transfers, missing statements. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Yet something felt different. One evening he opened the mailbox before Vanessa got home. Inside was a letter from a bank he didn't recognize. The envelope displayed only a partial logo. Most people would have ignored it. Quincy didn't. He examined it carefully, then placed it back exactly where he found it. That night, while Vanessa watched television, Quincy sat across the room pretending to read. But his mind wasn't on the book, because for the first time in years he wasn't looking at what Vanessa was saying. He was looking at what she was doing. And what he saw made him increasingly uneasy. A few days later he noticed something else. Vanessa received a text message. Her screen lit up briefly on the kitchen counter. Only 3 words appeared before the screen went dark. Account confirmed. Thanks. She grabbed the phone immediately. Too quickly. Far too quickly. Quincy said nothing. But a quiet suspicion settled into place. The kind that doesn't arrive with certainty. Only possibility. And sometimes possibility is enough, especially when a marriage is already cracking beneath the surface. By Thanksgiving, Quincy had become certain of one thing. Vanessa was hiding something. He just didn't know how large it was. Yet. The company gala took place on a Friday night in early December. Sterling Horizon Realty rented one of the grand ballrooms inside the Marriott Marquis Houston. The event celebrated another record-breaking year. More than 300 employees attended. Regional managers flew in from Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Phoenix. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Blue uplighting reflected against polished walls. A jazz trio played near the stage. Everything about the evening was designed to communicate success. Vanessa loved it. The atmosphere fit her perfectly. She spent nearly 2 hours getting ready. Professional makeup, a black designer dress, diamond earrings Quincy had purchased years earlier during a period when money had been much tighter. Standing in front of the bedroom mirror, she looked like someone who belonged in that ballroom. Quincy looked exactly like himself. Dark suit, white shirt, simple tie, nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just clean and respectable. When they arrived at the hotel, the valet attendants greeted Vanessa by name. Several executives immediately approached her. The attention followed her everywhere. Quincy remained half a step behind, not because he lacked confidence, because he preferred observing to performing. Inside the ballroom, Vanessa introduced him to several people. The introductions followed a familiar pattern. "This is my husband Quincy." A handshake, a smile, polite conversation. Then attention returned to Vanessa. Normally, Quincy didn't mind. But as the evening progressed, subtle details began stacking on top of one another. A vice president asked Vanessa about her leadership team. She answered enthusiastically. Then the executive turned toward Quincy. "So, what do you do?" Before Quincy could respond, Vanessa laughed. "Oh, Quincy works in maintenance." The executive nodded politely. "That's important work." Vanessa smiled, then added something unnecessary. "He basically keeps government buildings from falling apart." Several people chuckled, not cruelly, not openly, but enough. Quincy noticed. The vice president quickly changed the subject. Vanessa didn't. She seemed energized by the reaction. As the night continued, similar moments appeared again and again. Near the bar, near the buffet, near the stage. Each time the comments became slightly sharper, slightly more personal. At one point, a group of sales directors discussed investments. One man mentioned a vacation property in Colorado. Another talked about a beachfront condominium in Florida. Then someone asked Quincy if he invested. Before he could answer, Vanessa lifted her wine glass. "Quincy invests in power tools." Laughter erupted. A few people looked uncomfortable. Most simply smiled and moved on. Quincy smiled too. That surprised several people. They expected embarrassment, maybe anger. Instead, he calmly took a sip of iced tea. The reaction deprived Vanessa of something she seemed to want. By 9 o'clock, Quincy had spoken fewer than 50 words, but he had observed hundreds of details. That was always his habit. During his years designing security systems, observation had been more valuable than conversation. People revealed themselves when they believed nobody was watching. And tonight, Quincy was watching. That was when he first noticed Trevor Hale. The man stood near a group of executives beside the ballroom entrance. Tall, well-dressed, confident. His gray suit probably cost more than Quincy's truck. Trevor was known throughout Houston's legal community, a successful divorce attorney, frequent television guest, featured in business magazines, the kind of lawyer wealthy people hired when millions of dollars were involved. At first, Trevor seemed unrelated to the evening. Then, Quincy noticed something. Every time Vanessa crossed the room, Trevor's eyes followed her. Not casually, not professionally, personally. The observation alone meant nothing. But then Quincy noticed something else. Whenever Trevor made a joke, Vanessa laughed harder than anyone else. Whenever Trevor spoke, Vanessa focused completely. Their conversations carried a familiarity that felt unusual. Again, nothing concrete, nothing obvious. Yet Quincy's instincts quietly activated. The same instincts that had helped him identify vulnerabilities in security systems for years. Most failures began as tiny irregularities. Tiny irregularities often became significant problems. Around 10 o'clock, Sterling Horizon's CEO took the stage. Awards were distributed. Top-performing regional directors received recognition. Vanessa's name was among them. Applause filled the ballroom. She walked confidently to the stage, accepted her award, posed for photographs, then delivered a short speech. The audience listened attentively. At first, everything sounded normal. She thanked colleagues, thanked mentors, thanked her team. Then she smiled toward Quincy. For one brief second, he expected something sincere. Instead, she said, "And thank you to my husband, Quincy." Several people turned toward him. Vanessa continued, "He deserves credit for teaching me exactly what happens when you stop pushing yourself." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. The CEO looked surprised. Several executives exchanged glances. Vanessa smiled as though she had delivered a harmless joke. The audience responded politely. But Quincy felt something shift. Not because the comment hurt, because it crossed a line. Not a dramatic line. A revealing one. For years, the criticism had happened privately. Now it was happening publicly. Without hesitation, without shame, without concern for consequences. The realization settled quietly inside him. Something in this marriage had become fundamentally different. A few minutes later, people returned to networking. The music resumed. The atmosphere recovered. But Quincy found himself watching Vanessa more carefully than before, especially when Trevor Hale entered the picture. Around 10:30, Quincy stepped outside onto a balcony overlooking downtown Houston. The city lights stretched across the night horizon. Traffic moved steadily below. For several minutes, he stood alone. The cool December air felt refreshing after the crowded ballroom. Then the balcony door opened. Trevor Hale emerged. The attorney didn't initially notice Quincy standing near the railing. He pulled out his phone, checked a message, waited. Less than a minute later, Vanessa joined him. Neither realized Quincy was there, hidden by a decorative column several yards away. The conversation itself lasted less than 30 seconds, too far away to hear clearly. But Quincy didn't need words. He saw the body language, the comfort, the familiarity, the absence of professional distance. Then Trevor handed Vanessa a sealed manila envelope. She accepted it immediately. No hesitation, no questions, as if she had expected it. The exchange was brief, efficient, practiced. Trevor touched her arm. Vanessa smiled. Then both returned inside, leaving Quincy alone on the balcony. For several moments he remained motionless. The city lights blurred slightly beyond the railing. His pulse remained steady. His breathing remained calm. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inside, however, a puzzle piece had just fallen into place. Not the full picture, not even close, but enough to confirm that his growing concerns were not imaginary. The envelope bothered him. The secrecy bothered him. Most of all, the timing bothered him, because Vanessa had been acting differently for months. Private phone calls, unexplained meetings, missing financial documents, the mysterious account. Now, Trevor Hale, a divorce attorney. The pieces didn't fit together perfectly, yet, but they were beginning to form a shape. At 11 o'clock, Quincy told Vanessa he was heading home. She seemed relieved. That surprised him. Usually she encouraged appearances. Tonight she didn't argue, didn't insist he stay, didn't even ask why. "Okay," she said. "I'll catch a ride later." "With who?" She hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. "A coworker." Quincy nodded. Nothing more, nothing less. He left the ballroom, walked through the hotel lobby, collected his truck from valet, and drove home through the Houston night. Rain began falling shortly after he entered Interstate 45. The windshield wipers moved rhythmically across the glass. His thoughts remained unusually focused. Not emotional. Focused. He replayed the evening repeatedly. The comments, the embarrassment, the envelope, Trevor, the hidden account. Individually, each detail seemed small. Together, they painted a different picture. When Quincy pulled into the driveway just after midnight, the house was dark. Silent. Still. He sat inside the truck for nearly 5 minutes. Not grieving, not angry, thinking. Carefully, methodically. The same way he approached every complicated problem. Finally, he turned off the engine, stepped out into the rain, and walked toward the front door. Without realizing it, he had already made a decision. He wasn't going to confront Vanessa. Not yet. He was going to pay attention, because something important was happening behind the scenes. And for the first time, Quincy intended to find out exactly what it was. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday. Not by mail, not by email. A process server handed them directly to Quincy Bryant at work. It happened at 10:17 in the morning. Quincy was replacing a faulty access control panel inside an administrative building used by Harris County employees. He stood on a ladder with a screwdriver in one hand when a man wearing a gray jacket approached him. "Mr. Bryant." Quincy climbed down. "Yes." The man handed him a thick envelope. His expression remained professional, almost apologetic. "You've been served." Then he left. Just like that. No warning. No discussion. No explanation. Quincy stood alone in the hallway, staring at the envelope. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly. Employees passed by without noticing anything unusual. To them, it was just another workday. To Quincy, the next chapter of his life had begun. He waited until lunch before opening it. Inside were nearly 60 pages. Petition for divorce, asset claims, financial disclosures, requests for temporary orders, several allegations, and one very clear message. Vanessa wasn't simply ending the marriage. She intended to win. Completely. Quincy read every page carefully. Twice. Then a third time. Each pass revealed something new. Some statements were exaggerated. Some were misleading. Some were completely false. According to the filing, Vanessa claimed Quincy had spent years controlling household finances. That accusation surprised him, especially because Vanessa managed most of their daily spending herself. Another allegation described Quincy as emotionally manipulative. The filing offered few specifics, just vague descriptions, broad accusations, language designed to create an impression rather than prove a fact. But what caught Quincy's attention most wasn't the accusations, It was the financial demands. Vanessa wanted the house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, the joint savings account, several vehicles, and spousal support. The request seemed unusually aggressive, particularly considering her income exceeded his by nearly 3 times. Quincy sat in his truck during lunch and continued reading. The Texas sun reflected off the windshield. Traffic moved through the parking lot around him. Yet everything felt strangely distant. Not because he was overwhelmed, because he was trying to understand the strategy. The filing didn't feel emotional. It felt planned. Carefully planned. That thought stayed with him all afternoon. When he returned home that evening, Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen island. A laptop sat open beside her. She appeared remarkably calm, as though she had been expecting him, which of course she had. Quincy placed the envelope on the counter. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "You got the papers." It wasn't a question. "No reason to pretend otherwise," Quincy replied. She folded her arms. "I think it's time." Still, no anger, no shouting, no tears. That almost made it worse, because the conversation felt rehearsed, like a meeting, not the end of a marriage. Quincy studied her face. For years he had known every expression, every subtle shift. Tonight he saw something unfamiliar. Distance, not sadness, not regret. Distance. "When did you decide?" he asked. Vanessa looked away. "A while ago." That answer told him everything. The divorce filing hadn't started this process. It had only revealed it. The decision had been made months earlier, maybe longer. Quincy nodded once, then carried the documents upstairs. The conversation ended there. Over the following week, news spread quickly. Much faster than Quincy expected. Friends called. Relatives texted. Coworkers suddenly seemed aware of private details they shouldn't have known. That alone told him something important. Someone was talking, and it wasn't him. Several mutual friends quietly drifted toward Vanessa's side. Some never contacted Quincy at all. Others offered carefully worded sympathy. One longtime acquaintance called and immediately asked, "Is it true you controlled all the money?" Quincy nearly laughed. Instead, he simply answered, "No." The man hesitated, then changed the subject. By the end of the conversation, Quincy understood something. A narrative was already forming, and he was losing it without even participating. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. Vanessa moved into a luxury apartment near downtown Houston. The lease appeared to have been arranged well in advance. Furniture arrived immediately. Utilities were already active. Internet service was connected. Everything happened too smoothly, too quickly. Another sign of preparation. Another sign that the divorce filing was only one piece of a larger plan. That weekend, Quincy reviewed household records. Nothing dramatic, just routine documents, mortgage statements, insurance records, bank activity, retirement accounts. The deeper he looked, the more questions appeared. Not answers. Questions. Several financial transactions seemed unusual. Not illegal, just unusual. Money had moved in patterns he didn't recognize. Transfers between accounts. Withdrawals timed closely together. Balances changing unexpectedly. Again, nothing definitive. But enough to keep his attention. Monday morning, Quincy began searching for legal representation. The first attorney he contacted never returned the call. The second quoted a retainer so large it seemed absurd. The third spent 15 minutes explaining why divorce cases often became ugly. That conversation ended quickly. Then, Quincy found Jerome Watkins. The office sat inside an older brick building west of downtown. No luxury furniture, no dramatic advertisements, no giant television screens displaying courtroom victories. Just a modest law practice. The reception area contained 4 chairs and a coffee machine. The walls displayed certificates earned decades earlier. Nothing flashy. Quincy liked that immediately. Jerome Watkins greeted him personally. The attorney was in his late 50s. Broad shoulders, gray hair, steady eyes, the kind of man who looked more comfortable listening than speaking. For nearly an hour, Quincy explained everything. The marriage, the divorce filing, the accusations, the financial demands, the strange behavior. Jerome listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking questions, never rushing. When Quincy finished, silence filled the office. Jerome leaned back slightly, then asked a simple question. "Do you want revenge?" The question surprised Quincy. "No." Jerome nodded. "Good." Another pause. Then Jerome continued, "Because revenge makes people stupid." For the first time that day, Quincy smiled. Jerome continued reviewing documents. Eventually, he placed a divorce petition on the desk. "I've seen filings like this before. What do you think?" "But I think somebody spent a lot of time building a story." The answer immediately caught Quincy's attention. Not because it confirmed anything, because it matched his own instincts. A story. Not facts. A story. Jerome flipped through several pages, then tapped one section. "Stories can be powerful." He looked directly at Quincy. "But evidence is stronger." The room became very quiet. Outside the office window, traffic moved along the street below. Jerome folded his hands, then asked the question that would ultimately change everything. "Do you have anything that proves these accusations are false?" Quincy didn't answer immediately. His thoughts drifted back through recent months. The hidden account. The envelope at the gala. Trevor Hale. The suspicious financial activity. The strange conversations. The careful planning. Then another memory surfaced. A very specific one. A detail he hadn't considered important until now. Something sitting quietly inside his own home. Something installed years earlier for an entirely different reason. Jerome watched him carefully. The attorney noticed the change in expression, the hesitation, the realization. "You thought of something." Quincy remained silent. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Quincy slowly leaned forward. The first hint of certainty appeared in his voice. "Maybe." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "Maybe." Quincy nodded. "Maybe more than she realizes." The attorney sat back. Interested now. Very interested. Because for the first time since entering the office, Quincy Bryant no longer looked like a man reacting to events. He looked like a man beginning to understand them. And somewhere inside that realization, the balance of the entire case had started to shift. The cameras had never been about Vanessa. That was the first thing Quincy explained when he met Jerome Watkins again 3 days later. The attorney's office was quiet except for the hum of an old air conditioning unit. Jerome sat behind his desk while Quincy placed a black storage case in front of him. The case looked ordinary. Inside, however, was the beginning of something neither Vanessa nor Trevor Hale had anticipated. Jerome opened the lid. Several external hard drives, backup disks, folders labeled by date, nothing dramatic, just organized. Very organized. Jerome looked up. "Start from the beginning." Quincy nodded. "The cameras were installed 2 years ago." And that was true. The entire system had been created after a burglary wave hit several neighborhoods throughout Pearland. 3 houses on Quincy's street had been targeted within a 6-month period. One family lost jewelry, another lost firearms. A third returned from vacation to find their home emptied. Quincy worked in security systems for years. Installing protection had been an obvious decision. He designed the setup himself. Nothing excessive, nothing hidden. Everything was legal. Everything was disclosed. 4 cameras inside common areas: front entry, kitchen, living room, garage. Additional cameras outside covering driveways and entrances. Vanessa knew they existed. She had approved the installation. In fact, she initially liked the idea. "It'll make me feel safer when you're working late." Those had been her exact words. At the time, Quincy believed her. For years, the cameras recorded continuously. Most footage was never viewed. Why would it be the recordings captured ordinary life? People eating dinner, watching television, paying bills, carrying groceries. Nothing remarkable. The system automatically archived data onto encrypted storage drives. Every 90 days, old footage transferred into long-term backups. The process ran automatically. Quincy rarely thought about it, until the divorce papers arrived. That was when everything changed. The day after meeting Jerome, Quincy returned home and began reviewing archived footage. Not because he expected to find anything, because he wanted certainty. The process took hours, then days. Thousands of hours of recordings existed. Most were useless. Weeks passed with nothing important. Normal conversations, routine activities, arguments about schedules, discussions about bills, ordinary marriage problems. But Quincy remained patient. Observation had always been one of his strengths. Late one Friday evening, he found the first clip. The timestamp showed 8 months earlier. The kitchen camera. 6:48 p.m. Vanessa sat at the island drinking coffee. Her phone rested beside her. At first the recording appeared insignificant. Then Trevor Hale entered the frame. Jerome stopped the playback. "What was he doing in your house?" Quincy shook his head slowly. "I didn't know he had ever been there." The attorney rewound the video, played it again. Trevor wasn't standing near the doorway like a visitor. He moved comfortably, confidently, like someone familiar with the space. The conversation began casually, then shifted. Jerome listened carefully. So did Quincy. Neither spoke during playback. Several statements immediately attracted attention, not because they proved an affair, because they revealed planning. Strategic planning. Vanessa discussed future divorce proceedings. Trevor discussed appearances, presentation, perception, how certain actions might be interpreted during a legal dispute. None of it was illegal, not yet, but it was revealing, very revealing. When the recording ended, silence filled the office. Jerome leaned back. His expression remained unreadable. "Do you have more?" Quincy reached for another drive. "Yes, a lot more." The next recording came from 4 months later. Again, the kitchen. Again, Trevor. This time the conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. The subject matter had changed. Financial discussions appeared repeatedly. References to accounts, references to transfers, references to timing. Still not enough to draw final conclusions, but enough to establish patterns. The word patterns stayed in Quincy's mind, because that was exactly what he had been seeing for months. Patterns. One clip by itself could be explained away. Several clips could not. Jerome watched carefully, taking notes, recording timestamps, marking references, building a timeline. By the end of the afternoon, the attorney's legal pad contained pages of observations. The atmosphere inside the office had changed. When Quincy first arrived, Jerome had viewed him as another client facing a difficult divorce. Now he viewed him differently. Now there was evidence. Not assumptions. Evidence. The following week became a marathon. Every evening after work, Quincy reviewed additional footage. His dining room transformed into a temporary investigation center. Laptop screens, external drives, notebooks, time logs, coffee cups. The process exhausted him. Yet he continued. Because every answer seemed connected to another question. The deeper he looked, the more he discovered. One recording from the garage stood out. Vanessa and Trevor stood near a workbench while discussing financial arrangements. Again, no direct admission of wrongdoing, but repeated references to moving money before specific legal actions occurred. The sequence bothered Quincy, especially because it matched unusual banking activity he had already noticed. Another clip revealed Trevor discussing legal optics. The phrase appeared repeatedly. Optics, perception, narrative, presentation. The words sounded less like a husband and wife preparing for divorce, and more like a team preparing a case. Each new discovery strengthened Quincy's suspicion that the outcome Vanessa expected had been planned long before the filing occurred. Yet despite everything he found, one thing surprised him. He never felt rage. Disappointment. Yes. Betrayal. Certainly. But not rage. Perhaps because the marriage had been deteriorating for years. Perhaps because the emotional distance had already created separation long before lawyers became involved. Whatever the reason, Quincy remained focused. The facts mattered more than the emotions. That focus became one of his greatest advantages. A week later, Jerome invited him back to the office. The attorney had reviewed dozens of clips, cross-referenced dates, compared statements, analyzed timelines. Several thick folders now covered the desk. Jerome looked tired but energized, like a man beginning to understand a complicated puzzle. When Quincy entered, Jerome immediately closed the folder he was reading. "We need to talk." Quincy sat down. Jerome removed his glasses. For several moments he studied the files, then looked directly at his client. "I've handled divorce cases for almost 30 years. Quincy waited. "I've seen angry spouses." Jerome continued. "I've seen lies." Another pause. "I've seen fabricated stories." He tapped the folders. "But I rarely see people document themselves this thoroughly." The statement lingered. Quincy understood exactly what he meant. Nobody had forced Vanessa or Trevor to have those conversations. Nobody had tricked them. Nobody had manipulated them. They simply assumed nobody would ever examine their words later. That assumption was becoming dangerous. Jerome stood and walked toward a small television mounted on the wall. He inserted another drive. A new recording appeared. Kitchen camera, different date, different conversation. Within 2 minutes, Jerome paused the video, then rewound, played the same section again and again. Finally, he stopped. "What did you hear?" Quincy listened carefully. The statement was brief, easy to miss, but once heard impossible to ignore. Vanessa mentioned moving something before the filing, not after. Before. Preparation, planning, intent. Jerome nodded slowly. "Exactly." The attorney returned to his chair, then opened a yellow legal pad. A list of dates filled several pages, each connected to recordings, financial activity, travel records, phone logs. Everything was beginning to align. For the first time since receiving divorce papers, Quincy felt the balance shifting. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, the way important things often shift. Jerome leaned forward. "There is one mistake people make in situations like this." "What mistake?" "They react too early." Quincy understood immediately. The temptation existed. Confront Vanessa, reveal what he knew, force explanations, demand answers. But doing so would accomplish very little. Evidence was most valuable when preserved, not announced. Jerome seemed to read his thoughts. "We stay patient." Quincy nodded. "We stay organized." Another nod. "We let them keep talking." That sentence settled heavily in the room, because both men understood something important. Vanessa believed she was controlling the story. Trevor believed he was controlling the strategy. Neither realized the story was already being recorded, and every additional conversation increased the risk they were taking. Jerome finally closed the final folder. then sat silently for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried a seriousness Quincy had not heard before. "Keep backing everything up." "I already have." "No." Jerome shook his head. "Do it again." The attorney pointed toward the storage drives. "Because if this goes where I think it's going, those recordings may become the most important evidence in the entire case." Quincy glanced at the black storage case. For years, it had sat unnoticed in a closet. Ignored, forgotten, ordinary. Now it represented something else. Protection. Truth. And possibly the first crack in the story Vanessa had spent months building. Vanessa Bryant didn't prepare for divorce the way Quincy did. She prepared for an audience. The difference mattered. 3 weeks before the first hearing, she hosted what appeared to be an ordinary dinner gathering at her downtown Houston apartment. 8 guests attended. Most were coworkers from Sterling Horizon Realty. A few were longtime friends. One was Trevor Hale. Wine flowed freely. Music played softly through hidden ceiling speakers. The conversation moved from work to travel, then from travel to relationships. Eventually, as Quincy suspected it would, the topic shifted to divorce. Vanessa didn't bring it up immediately. She waited, allowed someone else to ask first. "How's everything going with the case?" The question opened the door. Vanessa stepped through it. According to several people who later repeated the story, she described herself as exhausted, emotionally drained, finally escaping years of disappointment. She never screamed, never sounded bitter. That was part of what made her effective. She told the story carefully, like someone who had rehearsed it. Quincy lacked ambition. Quincy held her back. Quincy never supported her success. Quincy made her feel alone. Each statement contained enough truth to sound believable. The problem was what she left out. The years Quincy spent caring for his father, the sacrifices, the bills he quietly paid, the responsibilities he carried. The details didn't fit the narrative she wanted, so they disappeared. Trevor sat quietly through most of the conversation, observing, occasionally adding a comment, occasionally guiding the discussion. Never enough to attract attention, just enough to shape perception. The pattern reminded Quincy of something Jerome often said. People rarely lie best when they speak. They lie best when they influence what others choose to remember. Meanwhile, Quincy spent those same weeks doing something entirely different. Every evening after work, he sat at his dining room table. No audience, no sympathy, no social media posts, just documents, stacks of them. Bank statements, tax returns, property records, medical bills from his father's final years, mortgage payments, insurance records, utility statements. Every document told a story. Unlike people, documents rarely changed their version. One Thursday evening, Jerome visited the house personally. The attorney walked through the front door carrying 2 legal boxes. He stopped when he saw the dining room. The table had disappeared beneath paperwork. Several laptops sat open. Color-coded folders lined one wall. A large whiteboard displayed dates and timelines. Jerome smiled. "You've been busy," Quincy nodded. "I figured details matter." "They do." Jerome looked around, then laughed softly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "Most people wait until they're losing before they get organized." Quincy placed another folder on the table. "I don't like surprises." That answer earned another smile. The attorney spent 3 hours reviewing records. The deeper he looked, the more confident he became. Not because they had a perfect case, because they had facts. Facts gave them options. Near midnight, Jerome closed another file, then looked directly at Quincy. "She's expecting you to react." Quincy already knew that. People like Vanessa often measured success through emotional control. If Quincy exploded, she could point to his anger. If he accused her publicly, she could call him unstable. If he confronted Trevor, she could portray him as jealous. Every impulsive reaction would strengthen her position. So Quincy did nothing, at least publicly. That decision frustrated Vanessa more than he realized. The following week she called unexpectedly. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, yet Quincy noticed something important. She kept trying to provoke an argument, not directly, subtly, mentioning the house, mentioning finances, mentioning future plans. Each comment carried a small hook, an opportunity for conflict. Quincy never took it. His responses remained short, calm, professional. The restraint irritated her. He could hear it. After ending the call, he immediately documented it. Date, time, duration, summary. The habit came from years working in security investigations. Documentation created clarity. Clarity created protection. While Quincy documented facts, Vanessa expanded her campaign. Friends who hadn't spoken to Quincy in months suddenly knew intimate details about the marriage. Coworkers repeated stories they could only have heard from her. Family members began taking sides. One Sunday afternoon, Quincy's cousin called. The conversation started normally, then shifted. "Vanessa says you've been hiding money." Quincy nearly laughed. The accusation was absurd. Most of their finances were transparent. Joint accounts, shared records, common access. Yet the rumor continued spreading. That alone told him something important. The objective wasn't accuracy. The objective was repetition. Repeat something often enough and people begin treating it as truth. Jerome recognized the same strategy. During one meeting, he spread several pages across his desk. Handwritten notes covered every inch. Names, dates, statements, connections. "What are those?" Quincy asked. "The audience." Quincy frowned. "The audience?" Jerome tapped the pages. "Everyone she's been talking to." The attorney leaned back. "She's preparing witnesses. Not formal witnesses, not legal witnesses, social witnesses. People willing to testify about impressions, conversations, perceptions, theater disguised as evidence." Quincy studied the pages. Some names surprised him. Others didn't. Several former coworkers. A neighbor. 2 friends from church. 1 former business associate. Each had heard a version of the same story. Jerome folded his arms. "This isn't a divorce strategy." "What is it?" "A reputation strategy." That observation stayed with Quincy because it felt accurate. Vanessa wasn't merely trying to win assets. She wanted validation. She wanted the court to officially confirm the story she had been telling everyone. The successful wife, the disappointing husband, the ambitious partner, the burden. The narrative depended on appearance, not evidence. Appearance. 2 weeks before the hearing, another interesting development occurred. Vanessa began posting carefully curated content online. Nothing directly related to the divorce, nothing obvious. Photographs from charity events, professional achievements, motivational quotes, messages about resilience, personal growth. Starting over. The posts attracted hundreds of supportive comments. People praised her strength, admired her courage, encouraged her journey. Many of those people knew almost nothing about the situation, yet they had already selected a side. The internet often worked that way. Jerome saw the posts and shook his head. "She's campaigning." Quincy looked at his attorney. "You think it matters?" "To public opinion, absolutely." Jerome paused. "To Judge Whitmore, not at all." That answer provided comfort. Because Judge Eleanor Whitmore had built a reputation over 20 years on the bench. She cared about evidence, not popularity, not sympathy. Evidence. 3 days before the hearing, Jerome called Quincy late in the evening. His voice sounded unusually serious. "We need to meet tomorrow." The next morning, Quincy arrived at the office. Several folders sat on the conference table. Alongside them rested a flash drive. Small, black, unremarkable. Jerome tapped it gently. Everything important is here. Months of recordings, financial records, timelines, supporting documents, backup files, cross-referenced evidence. Hundreds of hours of preparation reduced to a device smaller than a thumb. Quincy stared at it for several moments. The simplicity felt strange. So much effort, so many discoveries, compressed into something that weighed less than an ounce. Jerome noticed the look. Funny, isn't it? What is? People spend months building lies. The attorney pointed toward the drive. Then the truth shows up in something this small. Neither man smiled, because they both understood the stakes. The hearing wasn't guaranteed. Evidence didn't automatically create victory. The other side would fight. Object, challenge, attack. That was expected. Still, the foundation had been built. Patiently, carefully, without drama, without attention. The night before the hearing, Vanessa attended a private dinner with friends. Photographs later appeared online. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating. The images looked almost festive. Meanwhile, Quincy spent the evening at home, reviewing notes, organizing documents, checking backups one final time. No celebration, no speeches, no predictions. Just preparation. Shortly before midnight, he placed the flash drive inside a small protective case, then set it beside his car keys. For several seconds, he stared at it. The room remained silent. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Tomorrow, Vanessa would arrive expecting a performance. Tomorrow, Quincy would arrive carrying proof. And only one of those things would matter when the hearing finally began. The Harris County Family Courthouse looked exactly the way Quincy Bryant remembered it. Cold stone walls, tall windows, polished floors, people carrying problems in manila folders. On the morning of the hearing, rain covered downtown Houston. Traffic crawled along Smith Street. By 8:15 a.m., the courthouse lobby was already crowded. Quincy arrived alone. Dark navy suit. Black shoes polished the night before. A slim briefcase in one hand. No dramatic entrance. No entourage. No supporters. Just Quincy. The security officers recognized him immediately. Years working for county facilities had made him a familiar face. A few nodded politely. Quincy nodded back. Then continued toward courtroom 4B Judge Eleanor Whitmore's courtroom, one floor above. As the elevator doors opened, he immediately noticed something unusual. The hallway outside the courtroom was busy, much busier than expected. Clusters of people stood near the benches. Conversations filled the air. Most of them weren't attorneys. They weren't court employees either. They were spectators. Vanessa's spectators. Coworkers. Friends. Family members. People who had come to watch. Quincy recognized several faces. A regional sales manager from Sterling Horizon. Two women from Vanessa's executive team. Her cousin Andrea, a longtime friend named Melissa, even a former neighbor. The realization settled quietly. Vanessa hadn't simply prepared for a hearing. She had prepared for a performance. Across the hallway, Vanessa stood surrounded by supporters. The contrast was impossible to miss. Designer suit, perfect hair, professional makeup, confident posture. She looked less like someone attending court and more like someone preparing for a media interview. People gathered around her, offering encouragement, smiling, listening. Several hugged her. Quincy watched from a distance, not with anger, with curiosity, because every detail reinforced the same conclusion. She expected validation today, not uncertainty, not resistance, validation. Then Quincy noticed Trevor Hale. The attorney stood near a window speaking quietly with Danielle Cross. Danielle represented Vanessa. She had a reputation throughout Houston's legal community. Aggressive, sharp, highly effective. The kind of lawyer who built cases around narratives as much as evidence. She carried a thick binder beneath one arm. Trevor carried none. His confidence suggested he didn't believe he needed one. Jerome arrived a few minutes later. Unlike Danielle, he carried 2 boxes. Heavy boxes. Organized boxes. The attorney set them on a nearby bench, then looked toward Vanessa's group. His expression remained neutral. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. Quincy glanced across the hallway. "A lot of confidence." Jerome nodded. "Confidence isn't evidence." The response earned a faint smile. At 8:55 a.m., the courtroom doors opened. People began filing inside. The room filled quickly. Wooden benches creaked beneath shifting weight. Whispers floated through the air. Court staff organized documents near the front. The atmosphere felt strangely theatrical, as though everyone expected something memorable. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. The room immediately stood. The judge was in her early 60s, silver hair, sharp eyes, a reputation built over decades. She carried herself with the calm authority of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. When everyone sat down again, silence settled across the room. The hearing began. Danielle Cross moved first. She presented Vanessa's opening position carefully, methodically. The attorney spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Each statement built upon the next. Together, they created a specific image. Vanessa Bryant, successful professional, dedicated wife, patient partner, a woman forced to carry the burden of an increasingly disappointing marriage. Quincy Bryant, unmotivated husband, emotionally distant, financially irresponsible, resistant to personal growth. The portrait sounded convincing. That was the problem. It had been designed to sound convincing. Judge Whitmore listened attentively, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking questions, never revealing her opinions. Across the room, Quincy remained still, hands folded, expression neutral. Many people interpreted his silence as weakness. Jerome interpreted it differently. Discipline. After Danielle finished, Vanessa was called to testify. She approached the witness stand confidently. The courtroom seemed to lean forward, waiting, watching. Vanessa adjusted the microphone, then began speaking. Her voice carried just enough emotion. Not too much, not too little. Exactly enough. Years in corporate leadership had taught her how to present herself effectively. She described the marriage, the struggles, the disappointments, the loneliness. Some details were true. Others were selectively incomplete. A few were outright misleading. She spoke about career sacrifices, but omitted Quincy's father. She described financial stress, but ignored her own spending habits. She discussed emotional distance, but never mentioned years of public humiliation. The omissions mattered. Yet Quincy understood something important. Most people rarely notice what isn't said. They focus on what is. The spectators seemed captivated. Several nodded sympathetically. One woman wiped away tears. Another shook her head in disapproval while glancing toward Quincy. The performance was working, at least for the audience. Vanessa continued. He stopped trying. The statement hung in the air. He stopped growing. Another pause. I felt alone for years. Quincy listened quietly. The accusation wasn't new. He had heard variations of it many times. What interested him was how carefully the story had been assembled. Every statement pushed toward a conclusion. Every example supported the same narrative. By the time Vanessa finished, the image was clear. She was the achiever. He was the burden. Danielle smiled slightly. The testimony had landed exactly as intended. Then Judge Whitmore spoke. Her questions were brief, focused, practical, not emotional, not theatrical. The judge wanted dates, details, specifics. Several times Vanessa hesitated before answering. The pauses were subtle. Most people probably missed them. Quincy didn't. Neither did Jerome, because facts often create hesitation where stories do not. Still, Vanessa recovered smoothly. Years of corporate presentations had trained her well. Eventually, Danielle concluded direct examination. The attorney looked satisfied. Very satisfied. The courtroom atmosphere reflected it. Many spectators appeared convinced. A few glanced toward Quincy with open judgment, as if the case had already been decided, as if the outcome were obvious. That assumption would become important later. For now, however, the momentum belonged entirely to Vanessa. Jerome had not yet spoken. Not really. He had asked only a handful of procedural questions, nothing aggressive, nothing dramatic. The restraint puzzled several people. Even Danielle seemed slightly surprised. Why wasn't he fighting harder? Why wasn't he objecting more often? Why wasn't he challenging the narrative? The answer was simple. Because Jerome understood timing. The best evidence often loses power when introduced too early. The hearing continued through the morning. Witnesses described impressions, observations, personal opinions. Coworkers praised Vanessa's work ethic. Friends discussed her frustrations. Family members expressed concern. Every testimony reinforced the same storyline. By lunchtime, the atmosphere inside the courtroom felt increasingly one-sided. Exactly as Vanessa intended. During a brief recess, spectators gathered in the hallway. The conversation sounded optimistic, confident, certain. One coworker quietly remarked that Quincy looked defeated. Another predicted Vanessa would receive everything she requested. The assumptions spread easily. Nobody realized how little evidence had actually been discussed. Meanwhile, Quincy sat quietly beside Jerome. Neither man appeared concerned. They reviewed notes, checked timelines, verified documents, prepared. That contrast mattered. One side focused on perception, the other focused on proof. When court resumed after lunch, Danielle requested additional testimony from Vanessa. Judge Whitmore approved. Vanessa returned to the witness stand. This time, something felt different. More confidence, more momentum, more ambition. Success had encouraged expansion, and expansion often creates mistakes. Danielle asked a simple question. "Mrs. Bryant, is there anything else you believe the court should understand about your husband?" The question opened a dangerous door. Vanessa smiled faintly. The courtroom became very quiet. She glanced toward Quincy, then toward the judge. For the first time all day, her testimony shifted away from facts and toward something personal. Very personal, Judge Whitmore noticed immediately. So did Jerome. Because Vanessa no longer looked like a witness explaining a marriage. She looked like someone preparing to settle a score. And as she leaned closer to the microphone, Quincy realized the public humiliation he had anticipated was finally about to begin. Vanessa Bryant paused deliberately before answering. The silence lasted only a few seconds. But inside courtroom 4B, it felt longer. People shifted in their seats. Several spectators leaned forward. Danielle Cross remained seated beside the witness stand, confident and composed. Judge Whitmore waited patiently. Across the room, Quincy Bryant didn't move. His hands rested quietly on the table. The black flash drive remained inside his briefcase. Waiting. Vanessa looked toward the judge, then toward Quincy. A faint smile appeared. Not warm, not nervous. Certain. "I think the court deserves to know who Quincy really is." The sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. Judge Whitmore raised her eyes slightly. Not a warning. Not yet. Just attention. Vanessa continued. "For years, people have looked at him and assumed he was humble." She shook her head. "He isn't humble." Another pause. "He stopped trying." Several spectators nodded. The statement fit the narrative they had already accepted. Vanessa seemed encouraged by the reaction. He settled. The words came faster now. He stopped growing. He stopped contributing. He became comfortable being average. Quincy listened. His expression never changed. Yet internally, he noticed something important. The testimony was drifting, moving away from facts, moving toward emotion. That distinction mattered, because emotional testimony often gained power with audiences while losing strength with judges. Vanessa either didn't recognize the difference or didn't care. At that moment, she appeared more interested in winning the room than persuading the court. The danger of that choice would become apparent later. For now, however, she continued. When I met Quincy, he had dreams. Her voice carried disappointment. The practiced kind. The kind designed to sound authentic. He talked about building things, creating businesses, advancing his career. She looked down briefly, then back toward the judge. Eventually, he became satisfied doing maintenance work. The word maintenance carried extra emphasis, a subtle insult disguised as observation. Several people exchanged glances. Quincy noticed. So did Judge Whitmore. The judge made another note. Vanessa continued. Every morning, I would wake up determined to improve our future. The witness stand suddenly sounded less like sworn testimony and more like a motivational speech. I pushed myself. I worked harder. I sacrificed. Her voice strengthened. Meanwhile, Quincy apparently became the obstacle. The anchor, the weight, the burden. The contrast was obvious, perhaps too obvious. Yet Vanessa seemed unable to stop. Years of resentment had found an audience, and audiences can become addictive, especially for people who believe applause equals validation. She described the old Ford truck, the aging clothes, the simple routines. Each example carried the same implication: lack of ambition, lack of success, lack of worth. The courtroom listened quietly. Some spectators appeared sympathetic. Others seemed increasingly uncomfortable, because there was a difference between explaining a marriage and humiliating a person. Vanessa was beginning to cross that line. A woman from Sterling Horizon smiled at several comments. Another looked away. The reactions varied. Judge Whitmore's did not. The judge remained calm, patient, expressionless. Yet Quincy noticed something. She had stopped writing. Now she was simply watching. Watching Vanessa. That observation interested him, because judges often learned more from behavior than words. Danielle finally asked another question. What effect did this have on you personally? The opening was wide. Vanessa walked through it. It was exhausting, she sighed. Imagine spending years trying to build a future while your spouse refuses to move forward. The description sounded powerful, unless someone knew the full story. Unless someone knew about Harold Bryant. The doctor's appointments, the hospital visits, the caregiving, the sacrifices, those details remained absent, not because they weren't relevant, because they weakened the narrative. Vanessa continued speaking, now openly emotional, yet her emotion remained carefully controlled, almost too controlled. Years in executive leadership had made her an expert presenter. The problem was that presentations and truth were not always the same thing. At one point, she laughed softly. The sound surprised several people, including Judge Whitmore. Vanessa shook her head. You know what finally opened my eyes? Nobody answered. The courtroom remained silent. Vanessa looked directly at Quincy. The realization that I was married to someone completely comfortable being left behind. The sentence landed heavily. Several spectators nodded. Others looked uncertain. Quincy simply observed. Because the accusation revealed more about Vanessa than it did about him. To her worth seemed tied to movement, status, advancement, visibility. Everything else appeared secondary, including loyalty, including sacrifice, including character. The testimony continued, and with each passing minute it became less professional, more personal, more cutting, more revealing. At one point, Vanessa described Quincy as harmless but uninspiring. Another time she referred to him as a man who quit on himself. The language sounded rehearsed, memorable, almost designed for repetition. Danielle occasionally intervened with guiding questions, but increasingly she seemed content allowing Vanessa to speak. That proved to be a mistake, because momentum often creates overconfidence, and overconfidence creates openings. 40 minutes into the testimony, Judge Whitmore finally interrupted. The judge's voice remained calm. "Mrs. Bryant." Vanessa stopped speaking. "Please focus on facts relevant to the dissolution of the marriage." A warning. Polite, measured, public. Vanessa nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." For a few moments she returned to specifics. Finances, living arrangements, communication issues. Then the drift began again. The temptation proved too strong. Every glance toward the spectators encouraged her. Every sympathetic expression reinforced the performance. Soon she was describing Quincy's personality again. His appearance, his lifestyle, his perceived failures. Jerome remained motionless, not objecting, not interrupting, simply taking notes. The restraint puzzled Danielle. Several times she glanced toward him, expecting resistance, expecting objections. None came. Because Jerome understood something, the testimony was helping them. Vanessa simply didn't realize it. The courtroom clock continued ticking, minute after minute, word after word, until eventually the moment arrived, the moment people would remember. Danielle asked one final question. "If you could summarize the core issue in this marriage, what would it be?" The question should have produced a concise answer. Instead, it produced a declaration. Vanessa turned fully toward Quincy, no longer addressing the judge, no longer addressing the attorney, addressing him. The room became very quiet. Even the spectators sensed something unusual. Vanessa studied Quincy for several seconds, then spoke. "He spent years pretending there was value in being ordinary." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa continued. "He has no ambition." No reaction from Quincy. No vision. Still nothing. No drive. The silence grew heavier. Then came the statement, the one she would later regret most. Vanessa pointed toward Quincy, not dramatically, not aggressively, almost casually, which somehow made it worse. "He has nothing because he is nothing." The words hung in the courtroom. For a moment, nobody seemed certain how to respond. The sentence felt too harsh, too personal, too revealing. Several spectators immediately looked uncomfortable. One coworker lowered her eyes. Another shifted awkwardly in her seat. Even Danielle Cross appeared surprised. The attorney recovered quickly, but not before Quincy noticed. Across the room, Trevor Hale sat near the back row. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. The expression lasted only a second, then disappeared. Judge Whitmore looked directly at Vanessa. No expression, no visible reaction. Yet something had changed. The judge's attention sharpened. Her patience remained intact, but her interest had increased. The statement had revealed something, perhaps more than Vanessa intended. Finally, Judge Whitmore glanced toward Jerome Watkins. The attorney slowly closed his notebook, then rose to his feet. For the first time all day, every eye in the courtroom shifted toward him. The spectators expected cross-examination, expected arguments, expected confrontation. Instead, Jerome calmly adjusted his jacket, picked up a small black flash drive, and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "I believe it's time the court saw something." The courtroom fell completely silent. For a brief moment after Jerome Watkins spoke, nobody moved. The courtroom seemed frozen. Vanessa remained on the witness stand. Danielle Cross stood beside her. Judge Eleanor Whitmore looked from Jerome to the flash drive in his hand, then back again. The silence carried a different weight now. Not anticipation, uncertainty. The atmosphere that had favored Vanessa all morning suddenly shifted, not dramatically, subtly, like air pressure changing before a storm. Jerome remained standing, calm as ever. "Your Honor," he repeated, "the respondent requests permission to introduce video evidence relevant to several claims made before this court." Danielle rose immediately. "Objection." The response came so quickly it sounded automatic. Judge Whitmore turned toward her. "Basis?" Danielle adjusted her glasses. "We have not yet established foundation relevance chain of custody or authenticity." The attorney spoke confidently. For most of the hearing, confidence had worked in her favor. Now, however, Jerome appeared entirely prepared. "Of course," he replied. The attorney walked toward the evidence table, opened one of his boxes, removed several documents, then handed copies to the court. Additional copies went to Danielle, another set went to Vanessa. The movement was smooth, methodical, not rushed. Months of preparation condensed into a few simple actions. Judge Whitmore reviewed the paperwork. The courtroom waited. Jerome spoke again. "The recordings originate from a residential security system legally installed within the marital residence." Danielle's expression tightened slightly. Jerome continued. "The system was disclosed to both parties." Another page, another document. "The recordings were automatically archived in the ordinary course of operation." Another document. "The files include timestamps, storage records, and verification reports." Judge Whitmore continued reading. The judge's face remained unreadable. Vanessa appeared less comfortable now. Not frightened, not yet, just uncertain. Because she still didn't know what recordings Jerome intended to show. Across the room, Quincy noticed Trevor Hale straighten slightly in his seat. The movement lasted less than a second. Yet Quincy saw it. The attorney had recognized something. The possibility that this evidence involved him. Danielle attempted another objection. "Your Honor, we still have no indication these recordings are relevant." Jerome nodded politely. "That concern will disappear very quickly." The response drew several curious glances from spectators. Judge Whitmore finally looked up. "Mr. Watkins, what exactly do these recordings contain?" Jerome paused, deliberately, then answered. "Conversations directly related to testimony presented today." The room became noticeably quieter. Judge Whitmore considered the answer, then nodded toward the court clerk. "Prepare the display." A ripple moved through the spectators. Small movements, whispers, shifting posture. The audience that had arrived expecting a one-sided hearing suddenly sensed something different, something unexpected. At the front of the courtroom, a monitor was positioned near the witness stand. Another display faced the judge. A third screen was visible to attorneys. The technology itself wasn't remarkable. Family courts use digital evidence regularly. What mattered was what would appear on those screens. Vanessa sat very still. For the first time that day, Quincy noticed tension in her posture. A tightening around the shoulders. A slight shift in breathing. Small signs, yet unmistakable. Danielle leaned toward her client, whispered something. Vanessa nodded. The confidence remained, but it no longer looked effortless. Judge Whitmore addressed Jerome. "You may proceed." Jerome inserted the flash drive, Several folders appeared on the display. Dates, file names, timestamps, everything organized, everything professional. The presentation itself immediately created an impression. Not because it proved anything, because it demonstrated preparation. People who fabricate evidence rarely document it this carefully. Jerome selected a folder. The screen displayed a simple title, Kitchen Camera. The spectators exchanged confused looks. Several expected dramatic text messages, hidden bank records, private emails. Instead, they saw a camera file. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. So this is from the residence. Yes, Your Honor. And both parties were aware of the recording system. Yes. Danielle remained silent, because the answer was true. Jerome clicked another file. A paused image appeared. Kitchen island, countertops, dining area, nothing unusual. The timestamp sat in the corner. 8 months earlier. Vanessa's expression changed. Very slightly. But Quincy noticed. The date meant something to her. Judge Whitmore noticed as well. The judge glanced toward the witness stand, then back toward the screen. Proceed. Jerome pressed play. The video began. At first nothing happened. Vanessa appeared alone in the kitchen. She poured coffee, checked her phone, moved casually around the room. Several seconds passed. The spectators looked confused. One woman near the back folded her arms, apparently wondering why everyone was watching an ordinary kitchen. Then the garage door opened. A figure entered the frame. The room immediately grew still. Trevor Hale. The reaction wasn't explosive. Not yet. Most spectators simply recognized him. A few exchanged curious glances. Danielle's jaw tightened. Vanessa stared at the screen. Motionless. Trevor appeared comfortable. Familiar, relaxed. Not like someone visiting for the first time. He greeted Vanessa. She smiled. Then both sat at the kitchen island. The conversation began. Normal at first. Casual. Almost boring. Judge Whitmore continued watching. Patiently. The way experienced judges always watched. Not searching for dramatic moments. Searching for meaningful ones. Several minutes passed. Then Trevor said something. The words themselves weren't explosive, but they changed the atmosphere. Because the topic shifted toward divorce planning, toward strategy, toward future allegations. Jerome paused the video. Not for dramatic effect, to address the court. Your Honor, this conversation occurred approximately 6 months before the divorce filing. The judge nodded. Continue. The video resumed. Now the room listened differently. Every word mattered. Every sentence carried potential significance. Vanessa no longer looked comfortable. Danielle appeared increasingly concerned. The attorney had entered the hearing expecting to control the narrative. Now the narrative had acquired a screen, and recordings, and timestamps. The conversation continued. Trevor discussed presentation, perception, strategy. The audience remained silent. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody shifted in their seats. Even people who didn't fully understand the legal implications sensed the momentum changing. Then came another statement. A reference to future accusations. A reference to positioning. A reference to making certain claims appear believable. Nothing conclusive. Not yet. But enough. Enough for Judge Whitmore to begin taking notes again. Across the room, Quincy remained still. He wasn't enjoying this. That surprised some observers later. Many expected satisfaction, vindication, triumph. Instead, Quincy felt something closer to disappointment, because every sentence on that screen represented a choice Vanessa had made. A choice that had helped bring them here. The video continued. The room continued watching. Then, Trevor mentioned timing. specifically timing before filing. Judge Whitmore raised her eyes. Danielle stopped writing. Vanessa stared at the table. The atmosphere changed again. More noticeably now. Jerome pressed pause. The screen froze. Nobody spoke. Judge Whitmore looked toward Danielle. The attorney appeared ready to object. Yet she didn't. Not immediately, because objections become difficult when everyone has just heard the same words. The judge then looked toward Trevor Hale. The attorney suddenly found himself receiving attention he had not expected. His posture stiffened. Only slightly. But enough. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Then Judge Whitmore raised one hand. The court reporter stopped typing. The clerk looked up. The judge's expression remained calm, yet her voice carried unmistakable authority. "Stop the clock." Nobody moved. The words seemed to echo through the courtroom. Judge Whitmore looked directly at the court clerk. "Stop the proceeding timer." The clerk immediately complied. The digital timer used for scheduling matters froze. A strange stillness settled over the room. People exchanged confused glances. Several spectators looked toward one another, unsure what the instruction meant. Attorneys understood immediately. Judges stopped the clock when something required special attention, something significant, something outside the normal flow of proceedings. Judge Whitmore folded her hands, then looked once more at the frozen image on the screen. Vanessa, Trevor, the kitchen, the timestamp, everything visible, everything preserved. Then the judge spoke. Her voice remained measured, but the courtroom could feel the shift. "Mr. Watkins." "Yes, Your Honor. How many additional recordings do you have?" Jerome looked toward the flash drive, then back toward the bench. "Several." The answer landed heavily, because everyone suddenly realized the same thing. The first video had not been the evidence. The first video had only been the introduction. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds after Judge Whitmore asked her question. "How many additional recordings do you have?" Jerome Watkins answered honestly. "Several." That single word changed everything. Not because it proved anything by itself, because it destroyed a dangerous assumption. Until that moment, Vanessa Bryant believed she understood the battlefield. Now, she wasn't sure. And uncertainty has a way of exposing people. Judge Whitmore looked toward the witness stand. "Mrs. Bryant, remain seated." Vanessa nodded. Her expression remained controlled, but only barely. The confidence that had carried her through most of the day was beginning to crack. Not collapse. Crack. Across the room, Trevor Hale shifted in his chair again. The movement was small, yet Quincy noticed it immediately. For months, Trevor had appeared untouchable. The polished attorney, the strategist, the man who always knew where conversations were heading. Now he looked like someone hearing an unfamiliar language. Judge Whitmore turned back toward Jerome. "You may continue." Jerome nodded, then selected another portion of the same recording. The image returned to the kitchen. Same date, same timestamp sequence, same 2 people. Vanessa, Trevor. The monitor illuminated their faces. The courtroom watched. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody checked phones. Nobody looked away. The audience that had arrived expecting a public humiliation of Quincy Bryant was now watching something entirely different. They were watching the story change. The recording resumed. Trevor leaned against the kitchen island. Vanessa sat across from him, coffee cup in hand. The conversation appeared casual, dangerously casual. That was the problem. People often reveal the most when they believe they are speaking privately. Trevor spoke first. "You're going to have to think ahead." Vanessa nodded. I know." "No." Trevor shook his head. "Further ahead." The conversation continued, still not explosive, still not dramatic. Then came a sentence that immediately drew attention. Trevor discussed future allegations, not actual events. Future allegations. The distinction mattered. Very much. Judge Whitmore began taking notes again. Danielle Cross stared at the screen without blinking. Jerome allowed the recording to continue. No interruptions. No commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. A few moments later, Vanessa asked a question. One Quincy had heard several times while reviewing the footage. What if he doesn't react? The courtroom grew even quieter, because the question carried implications. Trevor answered. "We'll make him react." Danielle immediately stood. "Objection?" Judge Whitmore looked up. "Basis. Context." Danielle's voice sounded tighter now. "The statement is incomplete." Jerome remained seated. He didn't need to argue. The recording itself would answer. Judge Whitmore considered the objection, then shook her head. "Overruled." Danielle sat down. The video continued. Trevor elaborated. Discussing strategy, perception, narrative. The language appeared repeatedly. Not facts. Narrative, not evidence. Perception, not truth. Presentation. The words accumulated like stones, one at a time, until the weight became impossible to ignore. Several spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some recognized what was happening before others did. This conversation wasn't describing reality. It was describing how reality could be presented. That difference was becoming increasingly important. The recording moved forward another 2 minutes. Then Vanessa spoke again. The sentence that followed would become one of the most damaging moments of the day. What if he still looks reasonable? Nobody in the courtroom moved. Trevor laughed softly, not cruelly, confidently. "We'll make sure he doesn't." The silence afterward felt physical. Judge Whitmore stopped writing, slowly removed her glasses, then placed them on the bench. That action alone drew attention. Experienced attorneys recognized it immediately. The judge was no longer casually reviewing evidence. Now, she was studying it. Carefully. Very carefully. Jerome paused the recording, only briefly, then spoke. "Your Honor, the timestamp on this recording predates the filing by approximately 6 months. Judge Whitmore nodded. "I understand." Danielle remained silent. What argument could she make the date existed? The recording existed. The conversation existed. The facts were visible. Jerome resumed playback. The next section proved even more significant. The discussion shifted toward finances. At first, the references sounded vague. Accounts, transfers, planning, nothing specific. Then Vanessa mentioned moving funds. The courtroom listened. Every word now carried weight. "How much should I move first?" The question appeared on the screen. Simple. Direct. Dangerous. Trevor answered immediately. "Enough that it doesn't attract attention." Danielle stood again. "Objection." This time her voice carried urgency. Judge Whitmore turned toward her. The court heard the statement. Danielle hesitated, then sat down, because there was nothing else to do. The statement existed. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had seen it. Across the room, Quincy noticed a remarkable change among the spectators. Many of the people who had spent the morning sympathizing with Vanessa now looked uncertain. Some stared at the screen. Others looked down. One woman from Sterling Horizon folded her arms and leaned back. The posture spoke volumes. Doubt had entered the room. And doubt spreads quickly, especially when evidence appears. The recording continued. Another reference to accounts. Another reference to timing. Another reference to preparation. None of it looked good. None of it supported Vanessa's testimony. Judge Whitmore raised a hand. Jerome paused the video immediately. The judge addressed Vanessa directly. "Mrs. Bryant?" Vanessa looked up. Yes, Your Honor. The question arrived without warning. Were you discussing the transfer of marital funds in this recording? The room froze. Vanessa hesitated. Only for a second. But it happened. Everyone saw it. A hesitation that had been absent throughout her earlier testimony. I don't remember the exact conversation. The answer landed poorly. Judge Whitmore remained expressionless. Yet you don't dispute that the recording is authentic. Another pause. No. The judge nodded slowly. That answer mattered. Authenticity was no longer in question. The conversation happened. Now the issue became interpretation. And interpretation grows difficult when words are clear. Jerome resumed playback. The next segment lasted only 3 minutes. Yet those 3 minutes altered the atmosphere completely. Vanessa discussed creating an image, not reality. Image. The distinction returned again. She talked about how certain behaviors would appear, how certain claims would be received, how particular accusations might influence perceptions. The pattern repeated itself. Everything centered on appearances, nothing centered on truth. Judge Whitmore noticed. So did everyone else. Even Trevor appeared increasingly uncomfortable. The attorney who had once looked perfectly composed now stared at the floor more often than the screen. That detail did not escape Quincy, nor did it escape Jerome, because Trevor understood something before most people did. The danger wasn't any single statement. The danger was the pattern. Patterns tell stories, and this pattern contradicted the narrative Vanessa had spent months building. Eventually, the recording ended. The screen froze. Silence filled the courtroom. No one rushed to speak. Not Danielle, not Vanessa, not Trevor. The evidence had created a vacuum, a space where assumptions could no longer survive comfortably. Judge Whitmore folded her hands, then looked directly at Jerome. Is this the recording you referenced earlier, No, Your Honor? Several heads turned. The answer surprised people, including Vanessa. Especially Vanessa, because she suddenly realized something. This wasn't the recording. This wasn't the centerpiece. This wasn't even the strongest evidence. This was only the beginning. Judge Whitmore seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. The judge glanced toward the flash drive resting beside Jerome, then back toward the screen. The atmosphere grew heavier, more serious, more focused, because everyone now understood the same thing. The hearing that began as a public examination of Quincy Bryant was becoming something else entirely. Something Vanessa had never anticipated. Something Trevor Hale clearly feared. Judge Whitmore finally broke the silence. Mr. Watkins? Yes, Your Honor. The judge's eyes remained fixed on the monitor. Please show the court the next file. And for the first time that day, genuine concern appeared on Vanessa Bryant's face. The concern on Vanessa Bryant's face lasted only a moment. Most people in the courtroom probably missed it. Quincy didn't. Judge Whitmore didn't. Jerome Watkins certainly didn't. Because after months of confidence, months of preparation, and an entire morning spent controlling the narrative, Vanessa had finally encountered something she couldn't manage. Uncertainty. Jerome selected another file. This time the screen didn't display a video. Instead, a spreadsheet appeared. Rows, dates, account numbers, transfer records, nothing dramatic to look at, no emotional testimony, no powerful speeches, just numbers. Yet Quincy knew numbers could be more dangerous than words. Words could be explained. Numbers usually could not. Judge Whitmore adjusted her reading glasses. Financial records? Yes, Your Honor. Jerome handed additional documents to the court clerk. The spectators looked disappointed at first. Many expected another explosive video, another dramatic confrontation. Instead, they received spreadsheets, bank statements, transfer histories. The audience didn't yet understand that facts often move more quietly than drama, and far more effectively. Jerome approached the display screen. These records correspond directly with dates discussed in the previous recordings. The attorney clicked another document. A timeline appeared. Every transfer highlighted. Every account movement documented. Every date cross-referenced. Months of preparation compressed into a visual presentation. The organization alone made an impression. Danielle Cross studied the documents carefully. The attorney's confidence continued fading because she recognized something dangerous. The evidence wasn't random, it was connected. The recordings, the timelines, the bank activity. Everything reinforced everything else. That made attacks significantly harder. Jerome pointed toward one highlighted entry. March 14th. A transfer appeared on the screen. Then another. Then another. Several movements occurring within days of each other. Judge Whitmore reviewed the information. Amount. Jerome glanced at the records. $32,000 in the first sequence. A quiet murmur moved through the courtroom. Not because the amount was enormous, because nobody had previously mentioned it. Jerome clicked again. More transfers appeared, additional dates, additional amounts. The pattern expanded. By the time the sequence concluded, the total exceeded 6 figures. Now people were paying attention. Even the spectators who understood little about finance recognized the significance. Money had moved, repeatedly, deliberately, and apparently without Quincy's knowledge. Jerome paused, then displayed another chart. The courtroom watched. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. For the first time all day, Vanessa appeared genuinely uncomfortable. Not nervous. Uncomfortable. The difference mattered. Nervousness reacts to pressure. Discomfort reacts to recognition. She recognized these records. She knew where they led. Jerome spoke carefully. Your Honor, the transfers eventually totaled approximately $186,000. The number landed heavily. Even the spectators reacted. Several exchanged startled glances. Others looked directly toward Vanessa. Questions appeared where certainty once existed. The shift was unmistakable. Danielle stood. Your Honor, these figures require context. The objection sounded reasonable. Judge Whitmore nodded. They do. Then she looked toward Jerome. Can you provide it? Jerome almost smiled. Yes. The attorney clicked another document. A series of account records appeared. The names attached to them attracted immediate attention. One account belonged to Vanessa. Another belonged to a relative. A third appeared connected through linked transactions. The flow became visible. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. Judge Whitmore studied the sequence. The courtroom remained silent, because the pattern now resembled something more substantial than ordinary financial management. The transfers had direction, purpose, timing. Those elements mattered. Jerome allowed the information to settle, then displayed another timeline. This one included the dates of key conversations from the recordings. Immediately, the room understood why. The financial movements lined up with discussions. Not every transfer, not every conversation. Enough of them. Enough to create concern. Danielle looked toward Vanessa. The glance lasted only a second. Yet Quincy noticed. So did Judge Whitmore. For the first time that day, attorney and client seemed disconnected. Not coordinated, not synchronized. Disconnected. That alone was revealing. Jerome spoke again. The court will notice that several transfers occurred shortly after specific conversations regarding preparation for filing. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected, because the dates were visible. The documents were visible. The sequence existed. Judge Whitmore made another note. Then another. The judge's legal pad now contained significantly more writing than it had during Vanessa's testimony. Across the room, Trevor Hale sat perfectly still. Too still. His confidence had vanished entirely. Quincy found that interesting, because Trevor wasn't the subject of these records, not directly, yet the attorney appeared increasingly invested in their outcome. Jerome moved to another section. This time the documents revealed expenditures, private investigator invoices, consulting fees, miscellaneous payments. Again, nothing illegal on its face. The issue wasn't existence. The issue was disclosure, timing, source of funds, context. Everything returned to context. The attorney highlighted one particular payment. Judge Whitmore examined it. A private investigator. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked toward Vanessa. Was your husband aware of this expenditure? Vanessa hesitated. The pause stretched slightly longer than before. I don't recall. That answer hurt her more than any admission would have, because she had remembered countless details throughout the hearing. Sudden memory failures felt selective, and judges notice selective memory. Judge Whitmore certainly did. The courtroom atmosphere continued changing. The transformation wasn't dramatic anymore. It was cumulative, like water slowly filling a room. Each document added another inch. Each timeline added another inch. Each hesitation added another inch. Eventually, the level becomes impossible to ignore. Jerome clicked again. This time, the screen displayed a sequence of emails. Not personal emails. Not emotional exchanges. Administrative messages. Bank confirmations. Account notices. Routine communications. The boring kind, which made them powerful. Boring documents rarely perform. They simply exist. Several messages corresponded directly to the transfers. Several referenced account activity. Several occurred near dates already established through recordings. The pattern continued. Again, and again, and again. Judge Whitmore finally set down her pen. A rare gesture. The judge folded her hands and simply watched. The room understood what that meant. She wasn't gathering information anymore. She was evaluating it. There is a difference. Jerome allowed the final document to remain on screen, then returned to counsel table. No dramatic flourish. No theatrical conclusion. Just evidence. Presented calmly, methodically. The contrast with Vanessa's testimony could not have been sharper. One side relied on emotion. The other relied on records. One side told a story. The other built a timeline. The distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. After nearly a minute of silence, Judge Whitmore spoke. Mr. Bryant. The judge looked toward Quincy. Every eye in the courtroom followed. Quincy rose. Yes, Your Honor. The judge studied him. How long were you aware of these transfers? The question surprised several people. Not Quincy. He answered honestly. Months. A ripple moved through the spectators. Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow. You knew. Yes. Why didn't you confront your wife? The courtroom waited. Even Vanessa looked up, because she genuinely wanted the answer. Quincy remained standing. His voice stayed calm, the same steady tone he had used throughout the hearing. Because I wasn't sure what I was looking at. The judge listened. So, I kept gathering information. Several people exchanged glances. The answer wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was practical. Judge Whitmore continued. You never attempted to stop the transfers. No, Your Honor. Why not? Quincy paused briefly, then answered, because if I reacted too early, I'd never know the full truth. The statement settled across the courtroom. Simple, direct, and difficult to argue with. Judge Whitmore slowly nodded, then looked toward Jerome, then toward the documents, then finally toward Trevor Hale. The shift in her attention was subtle, yet everyone noticed it. especially Trevor. Because for the first time all afternoon, the judge seemed interested in someone who wasn't Quincy or Vanessa. The attorney's posture stiffened. Only slightly, but enough. Judge Whitmore held his gaze for several seconds, then spoke words nobody in the courtroom expected. "Mr. Hale?" Trevor looked up. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's expression remained calm, professional, measured. Yet the question she asked yet carried enormous weight. "Would you please stand?" The courtroom fell silent once again. Trevor Hale stood slowly. The movement seemed ordinary, yet inside courtroom 4B it carried the weight of a spotlight turning. For most of the hearing, Trevor had remained a spectator. Important, perhaps. Influential, perhaps. But still a spectator. Now that had changed. Every eye in the courtroom settled on him. Judge Eleanor Whitmore watched carefully. Not aggressively, not emotionally. Carefully. The distinction mattered. Experienced judges rarely chased drama. They followed facts. And the facts were beginning to point toward Trevor. The attorney adjusted his jacket. His expression remained composed. Years in courtrooms had trained him well. He understood how to manage pressure, at least when he expected it. Today's pressure was different, because he had arrived believing he understood the case. Now, he wasn't so sure. Judge Whitmore folded her hands. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes, Your Honor." The response sounded steady, professional, measured. Exactly what one would expect from a successful attorney. The judge nodded toward the display screen. "You appear in multiple recordings presented today." Trevor hesitated, only briefly. "Yes, no point denying that. Everyone had seen the footage." Judge Whitmore continued. "Were you acting as legal counsel for Mrs. Bryant during these conversations?" Danielle Cross immediately stood. "Your Honor." The judge raised one hand. The interruption ended instantly. "I am asking a clarifying question." Danielle sat down. Trevor looked toward her, then toward the bench. "I provided informal advice." The answer landed awkwardly, because it sounded carefully constructed. Not quite legal representation, not quite personal involvement. A space somewhere between. Judge Whitmore noticed. "So, you were advising her?" "I offered opinions." The judge made a note. The distinction clearly failed to impress her. Across the room, Quincy remained silent, watching, observing, the same way he had observed everything else. For months. Judge Whitmore looked toward Jerome. "Mr. Watkins." Jerome stood immediately. "Your Honor." "You indicated additional recordings exist. Yes? Proceed." Jerome walked toward the evidence table. The courtroom became silent again. Everyone understood what was coming. Another recording. Another piece of the puzzle. The attorney selected a new file. The screen flickered, then displayed a familiar location. The garage. Timestamp visible. Date visible. Everything authenticated. Everything preserved. The image froze momentarily. Vanessa stood near a workbench. Trevor stood nearby. Judge Whitmore leaned slightly forward. The video began. Unlike the kitchen footage, this conversation felt more private, more relaxed. The caution visible in earlier recordings seemed absent. That made it dangerous. People become careless when they feel secure. The first few minutes seemed harmless. General discussion, future plans, references to the divorce. Nothing dramatic. Then Trevor spoke. The courtroom listened. "We need to focus on optics." The word immediately drew attention. Optics. Again. The same language, the same pattern. Presentation. Perception. Narrative. Optics. The vocabulary repeated itself so often it had become impossible to ignore. Jerome allowed the recording to continue. Trevor discussed appearances. how situations might be interpreted, how decisions might be framed, how certain facts could be emphasized. The language itself wasn't necessarily improper, yet in context it carried weight, especially after everything already presented. Judge Whitmore watched carefully. The spectators watched even more carefully, because now they understood the importance of small details. The recording moved forward. Then came another statement. Trevor laughed softly. "Most cases aren't won by facts." The room remained silent. Trevor continued. "They're won by appearances." Jerome paused the video, not immediately. A few seconds later, long enough for everyone to hear it clearly, long enough for everyone to process it. Judge Whitmore stared at the frozen image. No expression, no reaction. Yet the courtroom could feel the significance, because a pattern had become unmistakable. Again and again, discussion centered on perception rather than truth, image rather than reality, strategy rather than honesty. Jerome resumed playback. The conversation continued. Then another critical moment appeared. Vanessa asked whether a particular claim might create leverage. Trevor responded. The exact wording wasn't explosive. The implication was he discussed pressure. Not legal pressure, practical pressure. Pressure created through appearance. Pressure created through assumptions. Pressure created through public perception. The distinction mattered enormously. Across the room, Danielle looked increasingly uncomfortable. The attorney understood what everyone else was beginning to understand. Every recording reinforced the previous one. Every conversation added another layer. Every layer strengthened the pattern. Jerome paused again, then addressed the court. "Your Honor, this recording occurred approximately 4 months before the filing." Judge Whitmore nodded. Her notes continued accumulating, page after page. Meanwhile, Trevor remained standing. That detail became increasingly uncomfortable. The longer he stood, the more exposed he appeared. Not guilty, exposed. A subtle but important difference. The video resumed. Then came the moment that changed everything. Trevor referred to influencing outcomes through perception. The statement itself wasn't criminal, wasn't illegal, but in context it sounded deeply inappropriate, especially coming from an attorney, especially given everything already shown. The courtroom remained silent. No whispers, no movement, only the recording. Judge Whitmore eventually raised her hand. Jerome paused immediately. The judge looked directly at Trevor. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt deliberate, purposeful. Then the judge asked, "Did you make these statements?" Trevor swallowed. A tiny movement, yet visible. "Yes." No objection, no denial, no explanation. Just yes. The answer echoed through the room, because authenticity was no longer disputed. The recordings existed. The conversations happened. The participants were identified. The facts were established. Now the issue became interpretation. And interpretation grows difficult when the evidence accumulates. Judge Whitmore looked down at her notes, then back toward Trevor. "Mr. Hale, are you currently licensed and practicing in the state of Texas?" The question instantly changed the atmosphere. Several attorneys in the room exchanged glances. They understood exactly what it implied. Trevor answered carefully. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded. Another note, another pause, then she spoke words that transformed the hearing, not dramatically, quietly, which somehow made them more powerful. "The court may need to refer portions of this matter for additional review." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Yet the meaning landed immediately. Additional review. Not discipline. Not punishment. Not yet. But possibility. The possibility alone changed everything. Trevor understood. Danielle understood. Vanessa understood. Most importantly, Judge Whitmore wanted everyone to understand. The hearing was no longer limited to marital disputes. Questions now existed regarding conduct, professional conduct, ethical conduct, conduct beyond the marriage itself. The realization spread through the courtroom, slowly, relentlessly, like a shadow lengthening across a room. Vanessa looked toward Trevor. For the first time all day, genuine fear appeared. Not concern about assets, not concern about reputation. Fear. Because the strategy that had once looked brilliant now looked reckless, and reckless plans often collapse unexpectedly. Judge Whitmore finally allowed Trevor to sit. The attorney lowered himself into his chair. His confidence was gone. Completely gone. The transformation was remarkable. Hours earlier, he had looked like a man controlling events. Now, he looked like someone reacting to them. The difference could not have been clearer. Jerome returned to counsel table. The attorney remained calm, focused, patient. No celebration, no victory speech, just preparation. Because he knew something important. The strongest evidence had not yet appeared. Across the room, Quincy noticed Vanessa staring at the table, not at the judge, not at Trevor, not at the spectators. The table, as if searching for answers there. For the first time since entering the courthouse, she no longer looked certain, and certainty had always been her greatest weapon. Without it, the room felt very different. Judge Whitmore reviewed several pages of notes, then looked toward the witness stand, then toward Quincy, then back toward Vanessa. The judge's voice remained calm, measured, yet every word carried weight. "We will continue." The statement sounded simple, but everyone understood its meaning. The hearing wasn't over. The evidence wasn't finished. And whatever happened next might prove even more significant than everything already revealed. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes. Jerome reached toward another folder, and Quincy realized the moment he had prepared for over 8 months was finally approaching. For nearly 6 hours, Quincy Bryant had said almost nothing. That fact alone fascinated Judge Eleanor Whitmore. The courtroom had listened to Vanessa speak, listened to coworkers speak, listened to friends, relatives, attorneys, and recordings, yet the person at the center of the entire dispute remained largely silent. Now that was about to change. Judge Whitmore closed her notebook, then looked directly at Quincy. "Mr. Bryant." Quincy stood. The room followed him with their eyes, not because he demanded attention, because he had spent the entire day avoiding it. Quiet people become difficult to ignore when they finally speak. "Would you like to address the court?" The question hung in the air. Vanessa looked up. Trevor looked up. Even the spectators leaned forward. Everyone expected something. A speech, an accusation, anger, revenge. After everything that had happened, most people would have understood. Months of preparation, public humiliation, false narratives, manipulation. Few would have blamed Quincy for striking back. But Quincy Bryant had never been interested in performances. He looked toward the judge. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Proceed." Quincy walked to the witness stand. The movement was unremarkable. No dramatic pause, no emotional display. Just a man crossing a courtroom. Yet the silence surrounding him felt different from anything earlier in the day, because nobody knew what he would say. Not even Vanessa. After being sworn in, Quincy sat down. Judge Whitmore waited. The room waited. Finally, Quincy spoke. His voice sounded exactly as it always had. Steady, calm, measured. "I don't have much interest in attacking my wife." The statement surprised several people immediately, especially Vanessa, especially Danielle. The opening didn't sound like a man seeking victory. It sounded like a man explaining something. Quincy continued. We've both made mistakes. The courtroom remained still. But mistakes and lies aren't the same thing. The distinction landed quietly, powerfully. Judge Whitmore wrote something down. Quincy looked briefly toward the bench, then continued. I spent most of this hearing listening to descriptions of who I supposedly am. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just observation. So I think it's fair to explain a few things. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Quincy folded his hands. For a moment his thoughts drifted backward, years backward, to a different version of himself, a different version of the marriage. I used to work for a security systems company. Several spectators looked surprised. Many clearly hadn't known. Vanessa stared at him, expression unreadable. Quincy continued. The job paid well. It offered advancement. I enjoyed it. Simple statements, simple facts, nothing exaggerated. Then he spoke about Harold Bryant, his father. The courtroom listened. Quincy described the diagnosis, the doctor's appointments, the progression of Parkinson's disease, the decline, the hospital visits, the medications, the long nights, not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly. That honesty carried weight. Because unlike Vanessa's testimony, Quincy never seemed concerned with appearances. He wasn't trying to win admiration. He was explaining decisions. Judge Whitmore listened carefully. So did everyone else. Many spectators appeared surprised. Several looked uncomfortable, because this was information they had never heard. Information that did not fit the story they had accepted. Quincy continued. When my father became sick, I had a choice. The room remained silent. I could continue pursuing promotions. Another pause. Or I could help him. No dramatic flourish. No attempt to portray himself as a hero. Just a choice. A simple choice, the kind people make every day. Judge Whitmore glanced toward Vanessa. The judge noticed something important. Vanessa wasn't looking at Quincy. She was looking down. That detail mattered. Quincy continued speaking. He described the years that followed, driving to appointments, handling insurance paperwork, managing medications, paying bills, maintaining 2 households at times. The details accumulated. Small, specific, difficult to dismiss. Then Quincy said something that altered the atmosphere again. I never considered those years a sacrifice. Several people looked up. The statement surprised them. Quincy continued. It was my father. The simplicity made it powerful. No applause, no reaction, just truth. The kind that doesn't require decoration. Judge Whitmore stopped writing, listening now, really listening. Quincy shifted slightly in his seat, then spoke about the house, the mortgage, the maintenance, the finances. Document after document already supported what he was saying. That gave his words unusual strength. Nothing depended on belief. Everything could be verified. I repaired most of the home myself. Another fact. I handled major maintenance. Another fact. I paid bills. Another fact. No performance. No theatrics. The cumulative effect proved far stronger. Then came a moment nobody expected, especially Vanessa. Judge Whitmore asked a direct question. Mr. Bryant, were you financially dependent on your wife? The courtroom became silent, because that assumption had lingered throughout much of the hearing. Quincy answered immediately. No, Your Honor. Judge Whitmore looked interested. Please explain. Quincy nodded, then revealed something he had never publicly discussed. Not during the marriage, not during the divorce, not even among friends. My former company was acquired. Several attorneys in the room looked up immediately. Acquisitions get attention. Quincy continued. Years ago, I received equity as part of a retention package. The courtroom remained silent. I kept a portion. Another pause. When the acquisition occurred, that equity became valuable. Vanessa slowly raised her head. The spectators watched carefully. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Quincy provided numbers. Not extraordinary numbers. Not billionaire numbers. But substantial. Enough to matter. Enough to establish independence. Enough to destroy another assumption. Judge Whitmore listened carefully. The judge already knew portions of this information through financial disclosures. The spectators did not. Vanessa apparently did not either. At least not fully. Quincy had never hidden the asset illegally. It existed in disclosures, tax filings, investment records. The difference was that he never talked about it, never displayed it, never built an identity around it. Judge Whitmore asked another question. Why didn't you tell people? Quincy almost smiled. The answer arrived instantly. Nobody asked. A few people shifted awkwardly, because the statement exposed something uncomfortable. Many had assumed Quincy lacked value because he never advertised it. The realization spread slowly. The old truck, the work boots, the maintenance job. None of those things revealed financial reality. They revealed personal preference. The distinction mattered, especially now. Quincy continued. I never cared about looking successful. His eyes moved briefly across the courtroom, not accusing, not defensive, observing. I cared about being useful. The sentence settled heavily. Several spectators lowered their eyes. One former coworker of Vanessa's folded her arms and stared at the floor. The public humiliation from earlier suddenly felt very distant, very foolish. Judge Whitmore remained silent for several moments, then asked the final question. Mr. Bryant? Yes, Your Honor. The judge studied him carefully. Why didn't you reveal all of this sooner? The answer arrived without hesitation. Because Quincy had spent months considering it. I thought facts would eventually matter. Silence. Pure silence. The kind that follows a statement everyone understands immediately. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. The courtroom watched. Even Trevor Hale looked exhausted now. Vanessa appeared smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Because for the first time all day, the image she had spent years building was colliding with reality. And reality was winning. Judge Whitmore closed her notebook. The sound echoed softly through the courtroom. Then she looked toward both legal teams. The hearing was entering its final stage, the stage where decisions begin forming. And as Quincy returned to counsel table, he noticed something he hadn't seen once during the entire proceeding. Vanessa looked genuinely uncertain. Not about the marriage, not about the evidence, about herself. For a woman who had spent years judging value by appearances, that uncertainty was perhaps the most painful revelation of all. By the time Judge Eleanor Whitmore called for a brief recess, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B no longer resembled the one that had existed that morning. The transformation was impossible to ignore. When the hearing began, Vanessa Bryant had entered surrounded by supporters, confident, admired, certain of the outcome. Quincy Bryant had arrived alone, quiet, underestimated, judged before he spoke. Now the positions felt reversed, not completely, but enough that people noticed. During the recess, spectators gathered in the hallway once again. This time the conversation sounded very different. The certainty was gone. Questions had replaced assumptions. Several coworkers from Sterling Horizon stood near the elevators speaking quietly. One woman shook her head repeatedly. Another avoided eye contact altogether. The narrative that had seemed so clear hours earlier now looked complicated, perhaps even false. Across the hallway, Trevor Hale remained isolated, no longer surrounded by confidence, no longer surrounded by influence, just standing near a window staring at the parking garage below. Danielle Cross spoke with him briefly. The conversation appeared tense, short, professional, nothing like the easy confidence they had displayed earlier. Meanwhile, Quincy sat with Jerome inside an empty conference room. Neither man celebrated. Neither man assumed victory. The attorney reviewed notes, organized documents, prepared final arguments. Because Jerome understood something important. Courtrooms do not operate on emotion. They operate on decisions, and decisions had not yet been announced. 40 minutes later, everyone returned to the courtroom. The spectators filled the benches once more. The attorneys took their places. The clerk resumed the record. Judge Whitmore entered. The room stood, then sat. Silence settled immediately. The judge opened a thick folder. Several pages were marked with notes, highlighted sections, attached exhibits. The evidence presented throughout the day now existed in an organized legal framework. That was what mattered. Not reactions, not opinions. Findings. Judge Whitmore began speaking. Her voice remained calm, measured, professional. The same voice that had guided the hearing from beginning to end. The court has reviewed testimony exhibits, financial records, and video evidence presented during today's proceedings. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The judge continued. The court is not issuing a final divorce decree today. That was expected. Major divorce cases often required additional proceedings. Still, everyone listened carefully, because temporary rulings can shape everything that follows. Judge Whitmore turned a page, then continued. The court has significant concerns regarding credibility. The sentence landed heavily. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Danielle remained motionless. Judge Whitmore did not specify names immediately. She didn't need to. Everyone understood. The judge continued. Multiple statements presented to this court appear inconsistent with documentary evidence. Another pause. Another page turned. Several financial transfers require further review. A murmur almost moved through the courtroom. Almost. One glance from Judge Whitmore stopped it. Silence returned instantly. Then came the first major ruling. The request for exclusive control of the marital residence is denied at this time. Vanessa's shoulders tightened. Barely, but Quincy noticed. So did Judge Whitmore. The judge continued reading. The residence shall remain under existing ownership arrangements pending further proceedings. Another blow. Not dramatic, but meaningful. Vanessa had expected control of the house. The request had formed a major part of her strategy. Now it was gone. Judge Whitmore turned another page. The request for temporary spousal support is also denied. The statement struck even harder. Several spectators exchanged startled glances. The judge's reasoning followed immediately. The evidence presented today does not support the current request. Simple, direct, legally devastating. Across the room, Quincy remained perfectly still. Not triumphant, not relieved. Focused. Because he understood the hearing wasn't over. Judge Whitmore continued. The court further orders a detailed forensic accounting review of certain financial transactions identified during testimony. That ruling carried serious implications. Not accusations, not conclusions. Review, investigation, documentation. Exactly the things Vanessa had hoped to avoid. The judge paused, then looked directly toward Vanessa. The courtroom followed. Judge Whitmore's voice remained calm, yet every word carried weight. Mrs. Bryant, you are ordered to provide complete financial disclosures related to the accounts discussed today. Vanessa nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The confidence was gone now. Completely gone. Only professionalism remained. Even that appeared strained. Judge Whitmore continued. Failure to comply may result in additional sanctions. The warning was unmistakable. No one misunderstood it. Then came the issue everyone had been anticipating. Trevor Hale. The judge turned another page. Several seconds passed. The silence stretched. Then she spoke. The court is not making findings regarding professional misconduct at this time. Trevor visibly relaxed. Only slightly. The relief lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Judge Whitmore continued. However, the court finds sufficient cause to preserve relevant records and refer portions of the matter for independent review. The relief vanished immediately. Several attorneys in the courtroom understood exactly what that meant. The judge wasn't reaching conclusions. She was opening doors. Doors Trevor desperately wanted closed. Judge Whitmore looked directly toward him. Mr. Hale. Trevor stood. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's expression remained unreadable. The court expects full cooperation should additional inquiries occur. Trevor nodded. Of course. The answer sounded smaller than earlier. Much smaller. The judge returned her attention to the bench. Another page. Another ruling. Then another. Several administrative issues followed. Asset preservation. Documentation requirements. Future hearing schedules. The legal machinery of divorce moving forward. Yet the emotional center of the day had already passed. Everyone knew it. The real verdict had not involved money, or property, or schedules. It involved credibility. And credibility had shifted dramatically. Finally, Judge Whitmore closed the folder. The sound echoed softly through the courtroom. The hearing was nearly over. Before concluding, however, she looked directly toward both parties. Her final observations were brief, yet memorable. The court is not concerned with appearances. Nobody moved. The court is concerned with facts. The sentence settled heavily. Several spectators lowered their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, because many of them had spent months believing appearances. Judge Whitmore continued. Facts often take longer to uncover. Another pause. But they remain facts. No one spoke. No one needed to. The lesson was obvious. The hearing that began as a public humiliation had ended as a demonstration of exactly that principle. The judge glanced toward the clerk, then back toward the parties. This matter will continue on the scheduled date. Another page, another signature. Then the final words. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. The sound echoed sharply. And just like that, it was over. People immediately began standing, gathering documents, whispering, leaving benches. The room filled with movement. Yet Quincy remained seated for several seconds. The noise felt distant, muted, as though it belonged to another world. Jerome placed a hand on his shoulder. We're done for today. Quincy nodded. Slowly. The attorney began organizing boxes. Evidence. Notes. Records. Months of preparation returning to storage. Across the room, Vanessa remained seated, staring ahead. Not crying, not speaking, just staring. For the first time in years, Quincy saw no anger in her expression, no superiority, no certainty, only exhaustion. The realization affected him less than he expected, perhaps because the fight itself had consumed so much energy, perhaps because winning had never been the goal. Truth had been. Eventually, Vanessa stood. Trevor approached briefly. Danielle joined them. The three exchanged quiet words, then moved toward the exit. Not once did Vanessa look back. Quincy noticed, and strangely he preferred it that way. A confrontation would accomplish nothing. The hearing had already said everything necessary. Jerome lifted the final evidence box. You coming? Yeah. Quincy stood. adjusted his jacket, picked up his briefcase, then walked toward the courthouse doors. The rain had finally stopped outside. A pale evening sun broke through the clouds above downtown Houston. People moved across the courthouse steps. Cars rolled through wet streets. Life continued. As Quincy descended the stairs, he heard someone call his name, one of Vanessa's former coworkers. The woman hesitated, apparently unsure what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I think we misjudged you." Quincy looked at her for a moment, then offered a polite nod. Nothing more, because explanations were no longer necessary. And as he walked away from the courthouse, leaving the voices behind him, he understood something that hadn't been clear for a very long time. The hardest part of this story was finally over. 6 months later, the cameras were still there. Most people would have removed them immediately. Quincy Bryant didn't. Not because he needed them anymore, because habits built over years tend to leave slowly, especially after everything that had happened. The small house in Pearland looked almost exactly the same from the outside. Same brick walls, same driveway, same fence along the backyard. Yet inside, the atmosphere felt completely different. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. For the first time in years, Quincy wasn't waiting for criticism, wasn't anticipating conflict, wasn't measuring every conversation for hidden meaning. The house had become a home again, a real one. On most mornings, he woke before sunrise, made coffee, sat on the back patio, watched the Texas sky brighten above the neighborhood. The routine never seemed boring. After the chaos of the previous year, ordinary life felt like a luxury. The divorce itself had eventually concluded. Not dramatically, not publicly, just legally. Exactly the way Quincy preferred. The final rulings largely reflected the direction Judge Whitmore had established during the hearing. Asset concealment findings damaged Vanessa's position significantly. Several requests she originally pursued disappeared entirely. The financial reviews revealed enough inconsistencies to undermine many of her claims. In the end, the outcome looked very different from the future she had imagined. Quincy never celebrated, never posted about it, never discussed details online. When friends asked questions, his answers remained brief. "It's finished." That was usually enough. Meanwhile, the garage behind the house had undergone a transformation. For years it had stored tools, ladders, old equipment, boxes filled with forgotten projects. Now it served a different purpose. Quincy converted the space into a security and audio consulting workshop. Nothing extravagant, just practical. Workbenches lined one wall, computer monitors occupied another. Testing equipment sat neatly organized on metal shelves. The setup reflected Quincy perfectly. Functional, efficient, quiet. Several months after the hearing, word began spreading through professional circles. Not gossip, not scandal, something more useful. Reputation. A few attorneys contacted Quincy about security systems, then a few more, then several law offices. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same legal world that had once watched him being publicly dismissed now wanted his expertise. His background in surveillance systems, data preservation, digital evidence management, chain of custody procedures. Suddenly, those skills carried value. The consulting work expanded steadily. Nothing explosive, nothing overnight. Just consistent growth. Exactly the kind Quincy preferred. Jerome Watkins became one of his first clients. The attorney visited the workshop one afternoon carrying a box of old case files. The two men spent hours discussing evidence preservation systems. At one point, Jerome laughed. "You know something." Quincy looked up from a monitor. "What? If Vanessa had simply left quietly, none of this would have happened." The observation lingered, because it was true. The downfall hadn't come from the divorce. It had come from arrogance, from believing appearances mattered more than facts. Jerome seemed to read the thought. People underestimate quiet men. Quincy smiled faintly. Sometimes. The attorney shook his head. No. Then he pointed toward the workshop. More often than you think. Across Houston, life continued moving forward for everyone involved. Not always in the direction they expected. Trevor Hale remained licensed, at least for the moment. But the review process initiated after the hearing created consequences of its own. Professional scrutiny tends to attract attention. Clients notice. Colleagues notice. Business partners notice. Several months later, Trevor's name appeared far less frequently in local legal publications. No dramatic collapse. No public disgrace. Just gradual erosion. Sometimes consequences arrive quietly, the same way truth often does. Vanessa's situation proved more complicated. Sterling Horizon Realty never publicly discussed the divorce. Corporations rarely do. Yet, reputational damage operates beneath official statements. Relationships changed. Opportunities changed. Perceptions changed. Within months, Vanessa left the executive role she had spent years pursuing. Officially, it was described as a transition. Most people understood otherwise. Quincy learned about it accidentally. A former coworker mentioned it during a phone call. The information produced almost no reaction. That surprised him. Once, he might have felt satisfaction, vindication. Now, he felt nothing. Not because he lacked empathy, because the fight itself had already ended inside him. Holding on to bitterness would only extend it. One Saturday morning in late spring, Quincy drove across Houston to visit Greenwood Memorial Park. The cemetery sat beneath a cloudless sky. Rows of headstones stretched across carefully maintained grass. The air smelled faintly of cut cedar and warm earth. He carried no flowers. His father had never cared much for flowers. Instead, Quincy brought a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and time. He sat beside Harold Bryant's grave for nearly 2 hours, saying little, remembering much. The old man had never liked dramatic speeches. Conversations between them had usually been simple, direct, practical, just like everything else. At one point, Quincy found himself smiling, because he could almost hear his father's voice, not praising him, not congratulating him, simply asking if the truck still needed that transmission repair. The memory felt real enough to make him laugh quietly. When he finally stood to leave, the burden he'd carried for so long seemed lighter, not gone. Life doesn't work that way. Lighter. That was enough. Weeks later, another unexpected event occurred. Vanessa called. The number appeared on his phone while he worked in the garage. For several seconds, Quincy considered letting it ring. Instead, he answered. "Hello?" A pause followed. Then Vanessa spoke. Her voice sounded different. Not defeated, not emotional, just tired. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. They discussed a few remaining administrative matters. Documents, signatures, property records, nothing personal, nothing dramatic. Yet before ending the call, Vanessa hesitated, then quietly said, "I didn't know." Quincy understood immediately. She wasn't talking about the assets, or the business, or the court case. She was talking about him. The person she thought she understood. The man she thought she had measured correctly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Quincy answered. "I know." The call ended shortly afterward. No apology, no reconciliation, no miracle ending. Just honesty. Sometimes that is enough. As summer approached, the final pieces of the old security system remained active throughout the house. The cameras continued recording. The drives continued storing footage. The software continued running, even though no one really needed it anymore. One evening, after finishing a consulting project, Quincy walked into the utility room. The central recording system sat mounted inside a metal cabinet. Indicator lights blinked steadily. Green. 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 Normal operation. For a long moment he simply stood there, looking at it, thinking. Those cameras had captured the truth when words failed, protected him when assumptions turned dangerous, preserved facts when narratives became weaponized. They had served their purpose. Now, their work was done. Quincy opened the cabinet, removed the final storage drive, held it in his hand. The device felt surprisingly light. Years of evidence, years of memories, years of life, compressed into something no larger than a wallet. He slid the drive into a storage case, closed the lid, then reached toward the control panel. One button. That was all. The monitors went dark. The indicator lights disappeared. The system powered down. Silence filled the room. Real silence. Not the tense silence of a troubled marriage, not the silence of a courtroom waiting for judgment. A peaceful silence, the kind earned after surviving a storm. Quincy stood there for several moments, then turned off the utility room light, closed the door behind him, and walked back into the life he had rebuilt. A life no longer defined by proving anyone wrong, because the truth had already done that for him. Some people spend years trying to be heard. Others spend years trying to be seen. Quincy Bryant's story reminds us that neither is as powerful as being truthful. He never won because he spoke louder. He won because he stayed patient long enough for facts to speak. While others focused on appearances, he focused on reality. While others built narratives, he preserved evidence. In the end, the difference mattered. Many people watching this story have probably experienced something similar in their own lives. Maybe not in a courtroom, maybe not in a divorce, but perhaps you've been underestimated, misjudged, treated as less valuable because of your job, your appearance, your income, or your quiet nature. The truth is that people often measure others using the easiest standards available. Real character rarely reveals itself that quickly. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth? Have you ever stayed silent while the truth slowly revealed itself? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who is going through a difficult season right now. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story features another ordinary person who was dismissed, overlooked, and counted out until one unexpected moment changed everything.